All right. So in part two, we're really going to focus on use outlet context. I'll briefly discuss prop drilling, but we're really going to focus on the heart of this lesson, which is outlet context. And we're going to dive pretty deep into it. And I want to start out by talking about the problem that we want to solve. So what my app has thus far is I have a home page and I've cleaned up the code a bit. And the homepage now just has our input and a button with the use navigate hook where I can enter a character's ID. And when I click on the button, this will tell React Router DOM to change the URL bar and actually drive the browser to that URL to our character page. So I have an individual character page. And once I've driven the browser to that page in the URL with my use params hook, I grab that ID param from the URL and using a use effect and Axios make a HTTP GET request to the Game of Thrones API to get my character data. And I add that to my component state. And then making sure that we have the data, we pass it into our character card to render it. And the character card is what we call a dumb component in that it doesn't have any state. It just takes props and does stuff with the props. So I have a home page that does that. I then created an all characters page, and we had this logic in our home page already, but I went ahead and broke it out into a separate page. And right now we have some dummy data here in some component state that's basically an array of characters and really just IDs and names. In a little bit, we will actually make an API call to get this data. And we're using the React Router DOM link component along with our URL param so that if I click on a character and I have an issue here, and the issue here is because I have refactored my code and now this to link is a relative path. So because it's now on this all characters path, it's adding to it. And I updated our routing to add these different pages. There's a favorites page, which is empty, and we'll talk about in a minute. And there is this page, the all characters page, that we're going to dive into. So this is a pretty common issue, and it has an easy fix. What I actually need to do is in my all characters page, I don't want this to be a relative path where note that React Router added characters /7 on top of character. I want this to be an absolute path. I want the full URL to just be character/ID. And now that's working. And the old version that was not using this map and this array, I put in a separate file so we can have it as a reference for later. And we can in fact fix that same issue here. And this was sort of the hard-coded version that we started with. So I have an all characters page. I have a favorites page that's empty. And what I want to accomplish is I want a list of all the Game of Thrones characters here. So I want to actually call the Game of Thrones API and get all the characters. So I see them listed and I can click on them. And then when I'm looking at a character, I want there to be a button that I can click that will add them to a favorites. So I can then go over here and I can see a list of my favorite characters and click on them and then actually see that character. So this is tricky, right? It touches on a bunch of things. I'm going to want to have, we have routing for some of this. We have all this pretty much put together in our router. We have our homepage routing. We have the all characters routing that is down here. we have the URL param in the individual character routing, which we covered before, and the favorites page. And I also added a not found page as an error. But this is actually going to require a lot of different component state, right? And let's in fact fake a little bit of this. We've already faked some of our data with all characters, right? If I go to the all characters page, I've faked some data here, and this is great, but I actually want to make an API call to do this. So I think in fact, let me write up some notes of what I'm going to have to accomplish. Right, we're going to have to when page loads, fire a use effect, and that will make an API call to Game of Thrones API for all characters. I'm going to have to load that character data into component state, and then like render a link for each character. And we'll come back to that in just a minute, because there's so many things that we have to tackle here that we're going to see that, in fact, we need a new tool called outlet context to accomplish it. Because my favorites page is also has some challenges. And in fact, I'm going to just go ahead and copy this code, and we're going to go to the favorites page, and I'm going to paste it in and get rid of this. And we're going to import the state that we need. And instead of characters and characters, let's call this favorites for consistency. And we should call this set favorites. And we'll import that link component that we need from React Router DOM. And we'll change this to favorite characters. And now, if I go to my app, well, I can have some favorite characters, and maybe I only want one, just so I can see that there's a difference. But this is hard-coded, right? And this is not what I want. What I really want to be able to do, what I need to accomplish, is I want to pass the favorite characters array in as a prop. And so what I'm going to need to do to accomplish that is somehow up here in app, and let me grab, forgive me. Let me grab our zoom annotator so I can do a little drawing here. So up here in the app, I'm somehow going to need a list of favorite characters. And that state is going to be have to pass down into favorites. But I also want to be able to add any character I want as a favorite or drop them as a favorite. And I need to do that here on the individual character page. I need to be able to add a favorite or remove favorite. And I also want to know if the character is a favorite. So I'm going to need to have all of that somewhere else, because my list of favorite characters I really need in two places now. And it'd be really nice if I could see here on the all characters page if someone is a favorite or not, as well. And so maybe we can accomplish this if I could somehow get everything onto that character card, because I'm using that character card all over the place. right? Because I have the character card over here and it's got character data. Um, and I now want to know if a character is a favorite or not. And it'd be nice if I could like add a favorite or like remove the character as a favorite. But in order to accomplish this, I have my list of favorites up here. And my character card gets used in a bunch of different places, right? And let's make we'll make another square for it and we'll make it see-through and we'll make this one green. The character card gets used in a lot of places. It's going to get used on the all characters page, um, or on the individual character page. It's going to get used on, excuse me, our all characters page. And I'm kind of wrestling with this here, but we're almost there. Um, I'll just kind of type this out so I don't get too lost in the sauce. All characters is going to need to use it. And then same with favorites. Right? And we have a whole bunch of stuff happening now. I realize this is getting a little messy, but the outlet can render all these different pages, and each one needs to render characters. And for each of these, I want to know if there's favorites or not. So there's not like one easy way to just pass in a prop. And really what I want is somehow it'd be great if my outlet could pass data down to anything I wanted. Um, and that's the challenge that outlet context was created to solve, right? We have all these different things, but we kind of want the outlet to be able to pass data wherever we want. And in fact, let me pull up another diagram real quick, and then we'll start writing some code and see this in action. And these diagrams are from the curriculum, and I'm just going to scroll down a bit here. And this is the diagram that I want to touch on. And this is where we're going to end up. So we're going to create state where we need to up at the parent level up top or favorites and whatever else we need. We're going to use what's called outlet context to pass it to the outlet. And then we can actually use a hook to grab it here or anywhere else. So let's start building this out and let's see this in action. So there's a little bit of preparatory work I have to do. I want to go to the Game of Thrones API and I want to get all of the characters. So to do this, I'm actually going to go to my individual character page and I'm going to borrow some code. So I'm going to do, I want to borrow this use effect. And then I think I want to borrow some of this logic here. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to actually, I think we can just code this out fresh. That might even be the easier way to do it. So here on the all characters page, let's just go ahead and let's import the use effect that we're going to want to use. Let's import Axios. And I already have my characters state here. And I'm already mapping through the characters. And what I'm going to do is I want to actually get data and replace this dummy data with it. So this dummy data is gone. And we're now going to use the use state hook. And let's write get characters async function. And we'll need a try catch block for our asynchronous API call. And we'll grab the response by making our get request from Axios. And for this one, it's just hard coded. So I should be able to just grab this and paste it in. And I need to remember to use an await, since this is an asynchronous operation that's happening in a promise. And let's just console log response.data to make sure this is working. And here in the use state, I'm going to add the empty dependency array. So this fires once after the page loads. So let's see how we're doing. Let me go to my app and clear the console and go to the all characters page. And it looks like we have an error. Cannot read properties of undefined reading map. So this is an easy fix. I totally forgot that I want to initialize this character's state to an empty array. Because now what map will do is I can call map on an empty array just fine. And the map function is smart enough not to do anything if the array is empty. So when the array is empty, it doesn't do any of this. But because we have an empty array, calling .map on characters won't break. So now I've got all my characters. I have my asynchronous function in the use state. I'm not seeing the console log that I hope to see. And this is the best kind of problem to have because I just have to remember to call my get characters function. And now we see a whole lot of characters, right? So now we're cooking, right? And we're just building this up step by step. And I'm running my code like every 2 minutes with console logs to help debug. Let's go ahead and update that component state to response.data. And now we run into a page not found error, which is interesting because we must have some sort of error happening. So response is not defined. And that's because I put this in the wrong spot because my brain is just a little jumping all over the place. So in here, the try block is where I'm making the API call to get the data. And so here's where I need to update the component state. And so we call our asynchronous function to make the API call, and then inside of it, we update the component state. And that error goes away. But it looks like we're running into another issue now. And let's break this one down because this one is good to see too. So I can see that I'm getting the data, but none of it is showing up. So how can I fix this? Let's do some console loggings to see the flow of execution. Let's just print out so we know when it starts to render. Let's print out our array. Let's just print out the length of the array so it's not too much. And let's say about to render.
Quick question.
And let's go ahead and let's add a console log to get characters. And let's add a console log to updating state. And we don't need to see that data anymore. So now when I run this and let's clear this and get a clean look. I see that page loads, we get characters, we're there, characters length is 0, we're about to render, we update state, characters length is 53, but it looks like we're not rendering, which I am,
Quick question for you.
yeah.
Did you mean to do a use effect versus a use state, or is that intentional?
Oh, thank you so much. That is
Okay.
100% unintentional. So let's see how we're doing now. So we're closer, but we still, yeah, Tom, thank you so much, man. Um, we're still not seeing stuff rendering, though we are seeing characters. So this makes me wonder, is my data what I think it is? So let's just look at the first character in that array and make sure that I'm seeing what I expect. And I am seeing what I expect. So this tells me that I've gotten to this point in my code and everything seems good. So the problem is probably in here. Um, and it must be some sort of silent error, though this did seem to be working before. So I think what I want to do now is I'm going to add some curly brackets so that I can make this a return. And let's just console log to see if we're getting any characters at all. So now I'm seeing everyone printed out. So I'm getting closer. Um, and the issue must be somewhere in here. And something funny must be happening. And I'm not sure what it is. So I'm now going to start simplifying. And let's just comment out all this stuff. And let's just return a div and let's just say hi. So this is a good sign, right? Now we're getting somewhere. Let's try this empty div. Um, oh, it doesn't like the way, yeah, the commenting out is going to start causing problems. So let me, let's go back a step here. So sometimes what I'll do when I'm running into issues is I will just rewrite the code because at this point, I know the problem is with my code and the problem is really just that my eyes aren't seeing it. So sometimes you kind of have to force yourself to rewrite the code again. So let's do this just step by step. And let's grab this link. Let's put it in here. Let's see if we can get rid of these comments. And I haven't figured out the error, but I've really isolated the issue now. It really seems like something is going wrong here, right? So let's just get rid of this and let's just get rid of this and let's just say c dot name. And in fact, as I'm doing this, now that I've done this, I've now realized my error. Um, I had dummy data before, but now that we have real data, these property names are different. And this dot name property on this object does not exist. And it's giving me a silent error, which is the worst kind, because it's not really failing, it's just undefined and it's breaking something else. And now I see the character names, right? So I know we went on a little bit of a tangent there, but this is actually a great example of real world debugging because it's good to use dummy data. to set up your code and get going. But then this is a really good example of the kinds of issues that you can run into that can be tough to track down. So now that I kind of know what the problem is, I'm going to just kind of like undo all this stuff that I was doing and go back in time a bit. And now I think over here, if we do C dot first name, we should, and we were so close. Um, let me get rid of, I have an extra curly bracket here. And there we go. So it took us a minute, but there's actually some good debugging to see. And I now have all of my characters. And I can now navigate around. I can use the forward and back buttons because React Router DOM hooks into my browser history as well. And now we can really kind of move on and get off to the races. So I apologize. We got a little lost in the sauce there, but let's talk about outlet context. Now that I have this working and I have this character card, we need to start adding things to our characters. I would like to be able to add a character to a list of favorites. So I'm going to go to app.jsx and I'm going to make some component state. We're going to make favorites and set favorites. And we'll make it an empty array. And let me make sure I've imported, let's import some, I've got use state up there. So I have this favorites list. I need to use this in a bunch of different places, right? I want to show it on the favorites page and not have this be hard coded. And when I look at an individual character, I want to actually see if I can add them to a favorite or remove them from a favorites and so on. So we're going to kind of build this up in pieces. And I'm going to go to my character card. And we're going to add a couple buttons here. And we're going to fake a little bit of data. Let's make a div and we'll say is favorite. And we'll make this a span. And then we'll make a button and this one will say add to favorite. And we'll just say add favorite and remove favorite. And these don't really do much yet. And we'll just write some empty on-click handlers. So we'll write a handle add function. And we'll write a handle remove function. And we'll kind of leave these as placeholders. And now if I click on these buttons, though the buttons need some styling. I have my actions, but I again have the challenge of how do I get this data in? And if I go to my favorites page, how do I actually get this to be real data? And let's fix this right now before I run into the same issue that I did before. And we will change this to first name. So I've kind of been talking through a lot of problems and doing a lot of preamble and setup, but let's actually see what outlet context looks like in action and how it's going to solve these problems for us. So in my app.jsx, um, first thing I'm going to do is import the use outlet context. Oh, excuse me. We actually are going to do that elsewhere. What we're actually going to do over here is in the outlet, we are going to give it a prop. And that prop is going to be an object. So I'm going to make a plain old JavaScript object. And whatever I want outlet to share with everything else goes in here. So to kind of hop over to our diagram, um, whatever I put in this object, I'm going to then be able to use outlet to share with anything. And let's see what this looks like. Let's add the list of favorites, and we'll just call it favorites. And let's make a set favorites and a remove favorites function. Or well, let's make add to favorites. And I think what we'll do is this will take in a character data object, and it is going to return our favorites list with the new character. Actually, let's call this updated. And what we'll do is we will set favorites to this updated value. Remove from favorites is going to be a little trickier. Let's take in character data again. And let's make updated. And we're going to have to use the filter function on our favorites array. So we're going to do favorites.filter. And for each favorite, if the favorite does not equal our character, and we'll check by ID, then we return it. So we filter out the item with same ID as character we want to remove. And again, we're now going to set favorites to updated. So up at the top level of my app, I've written really all of my logic. And I'm putting it all in this context object that we're going to be able to pass down. And this is sort of where the magic happens now, is here in this outlet component, it has a prop named context. And as this description says, we can pass in a value that can be anything we want, like an object, into the outlet. And then anything that gets rendered inside this object, like all of these pages, get access to that context. So now that I've done this, how do I use this? Let's go to our favorites page and see this in action. So I'm going to import the use outlet context hook from React Router DOM. And then we are going to, instead of doing this, we are going to do some object destructuring, and we're going to grab favorites from the outlet context, right? So this is returning that favorites object. And now I should get a list of all the favorites. And if I go to my app, and let's go to all characters and let's go to favorites, we see that favorites is empty. Let me go ahead and steal some character data real quick. And in fact, I think I have some example character data. So let's just see this in action. So let's import example char data from and I put it a level up outside the source directory. But remember, I grabbed this data from a while ago and just kind of stuck it there. So we're going to use this right now. And now that I have that object, let's put it inside here and see what happens. And now I have a favorite and it's being passed through context, right? Let's keep playing around with this and see what we can do with it. Let's work on the character card now. And then that'll be a good stopping point, and we'll kind of both have reached our conclusion, and it'll be a good point for questions. So let's use this use outlet context hook again with the character card. And the important thing to remember here is anything that's a child of the outlet gets the context. So if I kind of pull up React component tools, here's the outlet, and every page gets rendered inside the outlet, and the character card gets rendered inside the page. So all these I can use context for. The nav bar, I cannot, because the nav bar is outside of the outlet. So I can't use outlet context or the outlet context hook to put stuff in the nav bar. And this is why it's valuable to have data in the top level of my app, because maybe I want to know how many favorites there are and I want to display that in my nav bar. Maybe I want, num favorites equals favorites dot length. And if we go to our nav bar and we pass in that prop, and I don't think it should be named that, and we have num favorites. And let's just over here add some favorites. And I wonder if I have to force a refresh here. And let's see, we should be passing in the number of favorites into my nav bar. There we go. I think I just needed to force a page refresh. So that number of favorites is not happening through outlet context, right? I'm passing in the number of favorites as a normal prop. Let's tackle our character card. So I know I want to import the use outlet context hook. And I know that I want to do some object destructuring when I call it. And it's going to give me a couple things. It's going to give me all the favorites data, which is a bit much, but that's okay. Like we could maybe just store favorite IDs if we really wanted to. Um, and then there is, I believe it was add to favorites and remove favorite. And and I need to add my equal sign on the other side. Let me make sure those function names are correct. Add to favorites and remove favorite. Yep, we're good to go. So if I go to my character card, I need to accomplish three things. I want to add that person to favorites and remove them to favorites. So let's just try and see if these work. Let's do add to favorites, character data, and let's do remove favorite, character data. And let's go to all my characters. Let's go to Cersei Lannister, and let's see if we are able to successfully add her. And note that favorites changed from 1 to 2. If I remove her, it goes back to 1. And if I go see the favorites, I now see Cersei. Right. And so, in fact, let's add here. We sort of need an is favorite function, which we didn't write. So let's write it here. And it's a little messy. In fact, let's put this in app.jsx for consistency since everything else is up here. And we'll write a function named is favorite. And like all of our other functions, it's going to take our character data. And what we're going to do is we're going to see if they're in the list. So we're going to do favorites dot. I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but I'm just so used to filter that I'm going to do it this way. So we're going to do favorites filter. And if the favorite ID is the same as our character's ID, then we know they're there. And we want to grab the length because it's returning an array. And let's just return if in list is equal to 1. So if they're in the list, they'll be in there. I could actually add a lot of them. So let's just make this greater than 0. And now this should be able to tell us if a character is a favorite or not. Let's add it to our context object. And again, we take this object, we pass it as a prop into the outlet named context, and I now get to use it anywhere. And I need to grab it from that object. And now what I should be able to do is in here in my code, check if they're a favorite. And in fact, let's do this here. And now I can write a nice message. And I can add Cersei as a favorite and remove her as a favorite. And I can only show the buttons when at the right time, right? So if Cersei is not a favorite, let's add her. Um, if not, let's remove her. And so now I have that button toggle and I can add and remove Cersei. And we see here on the favorites list, we still have Brandon hard coded. So let's get rid of Brandon. Let's get rid of our hard coded person. If I go to app.jsx, where I have all of the favorites, we don't need that dummy data anymore. We can have an empty array. And now I can add Brandon. I can add Gregor Clegane. And I can add Rob Stark. So I've been doing a lot of talking here, and I realize this is a huge amount of ground we covered. Again, I want to emphasize what makes all of this work is the layout. Because all of our pages are children of the outlet, when we put context up there, we can use the use context hook to pass it down into anything. All right, I've been doing a lot of talking. I appreciate you guys being patient with me. Let me check in and see what questions people have. Rick, yes, sir.
Yes, this may be out of scope, but so you got your context. I don't. Can you scroll up your uh but yeah, right there. Yeah, all right. So the app, your app.jsx has all your scopes and your states and your state effects and uh, use effects, all that good stuff up in your app, and it's passing it down to the children. Now, um, what if you have a whole bunch of use effects? So you've got functions that are being passed down to all your children, multiple functions, and a whole slew of use states and use effects. And I found a Reddit thread about it, but can you separate all of that into its own context file and wrap your app in it? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, you
Oh.
can. Context, this is definitely out of scope, but just so folks are aware, the idea of context is actually something that's built into React. I'll share this link. I think this is actually a really good read. You can see this diagram over here for prop drilling. So React Router lets us use context in like a special way with the outlet and the context for that outlet. But you can actually create your own context in React. And they have a nice diagram here showing how instead of passing props all the way down, we can create context. So there's a create context hook and a use context hook that you can use in React to create your own context. Yeah, great question. And actually, that's a really good point. So that's good for people to know.
Yeah,
Let's see.
I just had the question. So, all right, thanks.
Yeah, totally. And I'll share this link. Tom, yes, sir.
So, two questions. One, if you were to pass a prop to outlet, not using like the outlet context, one, is that possible? But two, would that be considered prop or prop drilling? Is that why we utilize the outlet context hook?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I could pass a prop into outlet. I'm not sure what I would do if I just made up some prop because I didn't create this outlet component, right? If we go to React Router DOM outlet and we look at the docs, We see here the docs describing this component and what props it has. And it looks like it only has a context prop, though you can add, all React components have a class name prop and stuff like that. So I'm not sure I can just make up props and add it to outlet. React Router DOM might complain since we're using a third-party library. Um, Even if I could, though, how is outlet going to pass something into a character page or home page or all characters page? Um, the outlet component would have to be designed to do that. And React Router DOM decided that the way they want to handle that situation is by using context.
Got it. Second question is I saw that it functions pretty similar to a use state. Um, and when we set it equal to use outlet context, um, it has a open close parentheses. It looks like it might accept an argument. So are we able to set like a default there, or is that just like calling um, a method?
Yeah, we're calling a function here. We don't pass any arguments into here.
Gotcha.
I'd actually have to look at the docs to see if we can. In fact, we can look at the function description here. Uh, I have not seen that. I don't think we would need to. Um, if there are arguments to be passed to the hook, it is for a more complex use case. And you're correct. What we're doing here is we're destructuring the object that gets returned when we call this. Right? We pass in an object here to this context prop, and then wherever I want, I can call this hook, which will grab that object and return it, and then we destructure the object with these curly brackets. What other questions do folks have, or what might be good to review? Because I know that a lot of code got written, a lot of JavaScript. We're seeing a lot of new complex behavior, but also hopefully this is exciting because of all the things that we can now do. Sam, yes, sir.
Yeah, so just looking at kind of all the functions that are in app.jsx, would it be better to try to make components that can handle some of that logic and then push that component to app.jsx? Or like is that possible to handle the data that way?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, you could write these in the character card, right? I made a design decision here. You could just pass in favorites and like set favorites to context. And then all of this logic, basically, I could put in the character card. I made a design decision to do this because it gives me a little bit of abstraction. Um, because what I can do is in my character card, in fact, I don't even need the array of all the favorites for the character card. The character card has these functions, and it doesn't know how these work, and it doesn't need to care how these work. So because of that layer of abstraction or separation of concerns, the character card can focus on its job, which is to render a character and buttons to do what we want, right? And, I should add a little bit of a border to these buttons, but that's okay. And the actual work of how does this add or remove a favorite, the character card doesn't have to worry about. And so if I end up needing to modify in my main app component in app.jsx, how this favorites array is organized or anything else, rather than having to jump through a couple different files, I kind of have all of this in one spot. And maybe the code in here modifies, but as long as the method name is the same and it takes the same argument, and then the character card or anything else using it is unaffected. Yeah, great question. Does that help break it down a bit?
It does some, and it does answer some questions, but what I was kind of thinking, which I don't know if this would be even possible, because if you had a more complex application, like your app.jsx would get really big really fast. So if you could move some of that logic from add to favorites to its like own, add to favorites component, and
Right,
then import that logic,
right.
and then also taking in the data
I see.
just so you reduce it to just a
I
couple
see.
lines in app.jsx.
Yeah, you absolutely could. What you would then want to do, so if we look at, let's just use this remove favorites function as an argument, as an example. If I look at this function, this character data gets passed in as an argument. So I could put this function somewhere else and that part would work fine. The issue is this favorites.filter and set favorites, right? These are defined up here. I'm not passing them in as arguments to my function. It depends on these values being defined in the same file here. So if I want to move this code somewhere else, I need a way to then pass those in. So I then might have to do something like I would actually have to pass these in as arguments, right? And if my code is big enough, then maybe that's a pattern I want to follow. On a practical level, it's okay for app.jsx to get big. I also wrote this code pretty verbosely. Like, for example, remove favorite. This function can be condensed to look like this. Uh, and now in terms, once you get used to reading it that way, it's actually not that bad. So I think the short answer is you can. I think it's less of a problem than you may think, and it might introduce other complications because the real issue is where does the component state live, and then how do these functions interact with that? Yeah, does that help a bit?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right that if I have a big complex JavaScript function that kind of doesn't depend on like component state defined in here, I might want to put it elsewhere, 100%. But there's a lot of sort of like extra steps I've added here to try and make the code a bit more readable and have less syntactic sugar. If you kind of apply all the syntactic sugar, you can probably get rid of like 4 or 5 lines of code here. And it starts to tighten up. But in practice, components do start to get big. And that's okay. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Are there other things that might be good to review or that people have questions about, whether it's like the fundamentals of what outlet context is doing or walking through a bit of the code again? Okay, awesome. Um, and just to kind of wrap up, oh, I see there's a question. Let me actually wrap here and just do our review, and then I'll take a couple more questions. Thank you. So just to wrap up, the problem that we're trying to solve is I have all these different pages and I want to be able to pass different data into them, right? If I have a list of favorites up here, how do I get it from here to the outlet? And how do I get those favorites over here? How do I get the favorites into the individual character page and so on? So that's kind of the challenge that we wanted to overcome. And the solution was using React Router's outlet context, which allows us to create a context object that any component that's a child of the outlet can use, right? The nav bar cannot use the outlet context. If I look at app.jsx, my nav bar is a peer, it's a sibling, it's next to the outlet, it's not inside it. So if I tried to use the use outlet context hook inside here, it would break. And that's why I'm passing in num favorites the sort of standard way as a prop. But for all of our page components that get rendered inside the outlet, we can use the use outlet context hook from React Router DOM. We call the hook function. It returns an object. We destructure that object to grab the properties we want from that context object, and then we can use it here. And that means since the character card gets rendered inside all these child pages of the outlet, I can pass all sorts of nifty stuff like functions to add a character to favorites, remove them from favorites, check if they're a favorite, grab them from the context. And then for each individual character, I can check what the status of that character is and show different things. And now I'm able to have a really rich app where I have state living at the top level, but I'm able to pass it around and use outlet context to pass data between parents and children, right? And we see someone's added to a favorite, removed, added, removed. All right, folks, thank you very much. I hope this was useful, and I'll push up the code shortly.